Refreshing wild cherry cola meets smooth cream. The treat you deserve. Pepsi Wild Cherry and Cream. Treat yourself.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
Hey, this is Red Beach from Whitesnake and Winger, and you're listening to The Hook Rocks, the ultimate rock community podcast, the place to be for great rock and roll discussions and new rock music.
Good evening, everybody. It is Jay Scott. This is The Hook Rocks, the ultimate rock community podcast. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're staying safe and staying healthy. I know numbers are spiking across the country with COVID-19, and I just hope and keep my fingers crossed that we get through this again and, we don't have the numbers that we had, since March. I hope they start to go down. I really hope they do. I mean, it's just been a struggle for a lot of people. I know myself, I haven't been to a show since November of last year. I saw Big Wreck at the Bottom Lounge in Chicago, Canadian band. If you haven't heard them, go check them out. They're incredible. But, yeah, I am missing going to concerts. I am missing seeing live shows and getting that energy and getting that just feeling the hair standing up on my arms and neck, and it's been rough. It's been rough for a lot of people, and hopefully we can get back to normal soon, or some kind of normal, or whatever that entails. But we are here for you. We offer the escape with music commentary, interviews, and great guests like the one we have today. She is a returning guest. It's been, I think, since March or April since she was on. I'd like to welcome back to the Hook Rocks, Jaide Alicia. How you doing?
I'm great, Jay. Thank you for having me on again.
Yeah, it's been too long. I love what we did last time. A lot of people gave great feedback. It was great. We talked about, the importance of music merchandise, your own journey in rock and roll, which started with, I think, Y&T.
Yes, Y&T.
And it was just a great show, and I'm glad to have you back on.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm so happy that you offer this platform to people to be able to understand kind of multiple point of views in the music industry, especially with everything going on right now. You guys always have a myriad of guests, so there's always a different perspective that you guys offer your listeners.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because what I'd like to talk about today is something that I've spoken about several times. And I think I'm kind of evolving and changing my thought process as time goes by. And that topic is, are rock fans really killing rock and roll? And it's an interesting question because we see the classic rock bands still play stadiums, still play arenas, still be a big ticket item. Motley Crue, AC/DC's going to be touring. All these big classic rock bands still draw big crowds. But is that the crowd that's really going to keep rock and roll at the forefront? Sure, there's going to be younger people in that audience, and younger people are going to go see them. But I remember when I was growing up, I grew up in the 80s. I grew up with the glam metal scene of the 80s. I don't remember my mother and father and other adults who were my age, I'm 45 now, who were my age back then, getting excited about the new Cinderella record, or getting excited about, Def Leppard. They were still stuck in their bands, the Beatles and the Stones and Chuck Berry and all that stuff. So if you compare it to back then, it's virtually the same thing. It hasn't changed. But granted, I don't think a lot of bands were playing football stadiums, back then. I think the Stones were probably the only rock band that was doing that. But pop music still ruled back then. Michael Jackson and Prince and Madonna and all those acts. Of course. Yeah. So are we stuck in something, that mindset that really we shouldn't really care what people my age are listening to, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to gauge because from my perspective, like me speaking to you about this, right? So you're in the same age range as my parents. So my dad was the same way, growing up, he was a big metalhead, a big punk guy. So he was going to all those shows. And of course, pop, you were forced to listen to it pretty much. If you had MTV, you had to listen to Madonna at least once, right? So I think it is kind of your generation's responsibility, since now a lot of you have children or family members who are young now, to kind of try and influence them that way. Because I know if I didn't have my father, who knows what I would be listening to right now, probably whatever top 40 is, which I don't even know who plays on the radio anymore because I don't listen to it. But I think the influence that the older generation has is really important on people now, and also just the cyclical factor of everything. Everything from the 80s and 90s is coming back now, so the music included. I see some of my friends who I went to high school with, posting about, I saw some Eddie Van Halen posts, and I'm like, whoa, like, this is great. You guys know who Eddie Van Halen is. So I think there's definitely a lasting impact on the nostalgia that the 80s had to offer that is appealing to people in my age range as well.
I do see that. I have a 15-year-old son who I've talked about many times on this podcast, and he and his friends love rock music. But they also have their own bands now. And the difference between when I was 15 years old to now is kids have a lot more distractions. They have a lot more things pulling them in different directions, whether it's the video game technology, which wasn't as prevalent when we had Atari. I think maybe Nintendo had just come out with their first console. But it wasn't like you spent the whole day playing that stuff, or you didn't submerge yourself in like Call of Duty or these games that these kids have now, where they can talk, they can talk to their friends while they're playing, with a headset or an earpiece or whatever. That wasn't even a thought back then. There's obviously different activities. There's just so many things. There's social media now that's pulling them away from other things. So basically, when I was growing up, an album or a CD was like a babysitter for me, right? Like I would take that album into my room and I would lose myself into that album for a few hours, when I first bought it. And, my mother knew where I was. I was in the bedroom listening to this new record. I wasn't, online, or I wasn't in social media where my parents had to worry about who I'm online with and what I'm chatting about and all this stuff. So it was pretty simple. And I think now, because there's so many great new rock bands out there, that maybe it's not too many platforms. Maybe it's not, there's so many different ways you can find new music. Because that is a positive, right? I mean, it is a positive that you can have different outlets to showcase your music. Maybe it's just too many distractions.
I think like you're saying, I definitely think it goes both ways, because like the era of, you know, you guys go to the record store, you pick up a new record that you and your friends have been dying to hear, and you go home, you all listen to it, you know, you try and learn the words, you read the little booklets and stuff. That doesn't really happen anymore, or at least in the vast majority of this generation. I know I certainly do those things, but I do think I'm kind of a niche market, just because music is my thing and it's not everybody's thing. But as far as social media goes, it definitely has its pros and cons, because I mean, if you aren't filtering things out, you'll just get all this garbage thrown at you, you know, between the politics and whatever. Social media is kind of, you know, getting taken over right now. So even people who are trying to promote their music, now is like the worst time, because nobody's thinking about the next record that's coming out, you know, with everything that's going on in the world. But at the same time, it is so crucial, given the fact that nobody's really been able to go do anything for the last 7 or 8 months, because now people are starting to have to be creative to keep themselves entertained. And for me, the fact that that guy made that Fleetwood Mac TikTok, and now everybody's talking about Fleetwood Mac again for the first time, and you know, they're on the Billboard charts almost like number one since when the album came out in the late 70s. I think that's fantastic. I think social media has really offered, you know, an outlet for people to kind of discover these new things that might not necessarily be new, but are new to them. And that might make them want to explore it more. So I think social media can be used as kind of like a nudge, you know, a push in the right direction. You know, you see this video, hey, what's that song in the background? And then they can dive deeper on their own time, or if they're interested in it.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. You know, a nudge. You know I post a lot of music on my Twitter feed and Facebook, and it's more or less a nudge to say, hey, here's some new music that you should be listening to. You know, no one breaks a band on social media. No music site is breaking somebody because there's so many outlets to do and there's so many things that you have to do. But people do nudge a lot, and I think that's an awesome thing, because that's something that we didn't have back then. It was more word of mouth. It was, hey, I made you, a tape of some bands I'm listening to, check them out, and then.
Right. Like you'd see a flyer on the street and be like, oh,
right.
That looks cool. And maybe you'd like go check it out.
Right. Absolutely. And I think it's good too. Social media can have a way of exposing things that maybe a kid hasn't listened to. Like, I know it's sad that Eddie Van Halen passed away recently.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
But I always believe out of something bad, something good happens. If his passing gives young kids an opening to listening to his music, an open to listen to his guitar and his,
right.
That's a positive thing, right? If a new generation discovers Van Halen and Eddie Van Halen because of this, because we were just talking last year, I think it was, maybe it was a couple years ago, about how Billie Eilish didn't know who Eddie Van Halen was, and then there was all
right,
these,
I forgot.
Right, there were all these articles about is Van Halen just going to be one of those bands that just fades into the sunset, and it's one of those bands that only a few people will hear about 10 years from now. And it was a sad thing, because like, oh my God, Van Halen was so big in the 80s and late 70s,
right?
So maybe it'll offer a resurgence in their popularity, and also in a resurgence in the influence of Eddie, because we've also talked about the lack of young guitar heroes, right, that were existence back then. So maybe this is all good. Maybe to make some sense of his death and his passing, this can be something that can make us all heal and, kind of ease that pain, because maybe this will offer that to younger generation.
Yeah, like you were saying, of course, it's like a travesty that he passed away, because, it came so suddenly. Nobody was really expecting to wake up that day and see that he had passed. But like you said, there's always kind of good with the bad. And I was pleasantly surprised at how much coverage he really did get upon his passing, by all the popular media outlets and everything. It was like everybody was talking about it, because he had such an impact on music, on the world. So I think him passing and the amount of coverage it got definitely will expose more people to, oh, who's this guy that everybody's talking about? He must have been great, since all these people, are mourning his loss to this, to such a high degree. So I, like you said, I do think that his passing maybe will have a positive influence on the younger generation. And ultimately, I think maybe that's what he would have wanted, if anything, that his legacy is still going to go on. His son is still alive. Wolf isn't going to let that just die out. So like you said, the good with the bad, you got to look at it positively.
Absolutely. To kind of correlate that too with, the Motley Crue movie, The Dirt, that came out in May of 2019. Yes. You had a whole surge. You had a surge with interest from the youth of today. I mean, my son and his friends. I took funny story. I took him and two of his buddies to a record store this past Sunday, and my son's been to a record store because I still buy physical copies of music. So I think his first album he ever bought was Sonic Highways by Foo Fighters. And,
good one.
Yeah. And so I took, all his friends now are getting into rock music. So two of his friends wanted to go to a record store. So we went to a record store, and they were like, they walked in and they couldn't believe what they were seeing. It was just a building with music in it. It's like
right.
Music video, music posters and novelty items and stuff. I mean, they had I don't think they understood the stuff like this exists, and it was pretty prevalent 20, 30 years ago. So they had a great time. They were buying music and Motley Crue and Ozzy. I know my son wanted to get the new Tyler Bryant album and the new Struts album. So it was a cool moment for me to experience that with them, and them just being kind of overwhelmed with physical, copies of music, and rather than just point, click, and download. And
right.
I know I've been, I know some people kind of laugh when I keep mentioning it, but the physical connection to music was very important to me. And it was very important to a lot of rock fans over the years. And I think the lack of that physical connection is what's hurting rock music the most in terms of being prevalent, being relevant, because it's the relationship is different. Now music is more background than it was for the younger generation. You have it in your video games, you have it in every store you go shopping to, at, and it's not like it's not special anymore. And I think that hurts the connection with the younger generation.
I see your point. I really do. Because it's like, for me growing up, I was lucky that I had parents who took me to the record store because they were music people. But for the kids who don't grow up in that environment necessarily, with parents who, hail rock music or any music in general, they don't get that experience. And in my personal experience, I think it has a lot to do with also schooling, because the arts and music and those kind of creative outlets aren't pushed in schools anymore. I went to a very American, it was like a movie high school, we were a football high school. We had homecoming. It was very sports oriented. And the people who, did band or chorus, I studied music theory. There were 7 people in my music theory class. So the funding wasn't there. The interest, because everybody was more focused, okay, we want to get a football scholarship. We're going to get a cheerleading trophy, whatever it may be. I think it has a lot to do with the influence growing up. It's like you spend half of your adolescence in schools around your friends with these teachers, and you're not getting music really pushed on you anymore. So I do think it has a lot to do with just the way, not even my generation, but maybe whatever the generation below me is. I'm 22. So whoever would be in school now, I don't know what their generation XYZ, whatever it's called, but I think it's important for schools and programs like that to realize that music and the arts is something that's really important, and it's saves a lot of kids. You know, you don't know what's going on in their home life. So, you know, you put on the headphones and you block it all out. And I think that's something that's really lacking today.
I remember taking music appreciation in class. I went to a Catholic grade school, first grade.
Oh boy.
Yeah, first grade to eighth grade. So I remember, you know, I had a penguin, Sister Benedicta, who taught music appreciation, and we learned all about classical music like Tchaikovsky and Beethoven and Mozart and all that stuff. And, you know, I have an appreciation for that stuff, you know, because I learned a lot about it. But I was listening to rock and roll first, second grade. Yeah. You know, I mean, my brother really was my gateway to music, you know, because whatever he brought into the house, I would listen to. You know, whether it was through his bedroom door when he was blaring his stereo, or just me being allowed into his room as a younger brother, you know, and listening and checking it out. So I had that. I was fortunate to have that gateway that maybe a lot of people didn't have. But, you know, when you think about young people and music being pushed on them, I still remember going to friends' house and just us sitting around the backyard listening to music on a boombox, or, you know, in their basement, you know, listening to music. Whereas now I think it's video games. Everybody's playing video games and everybody's doing that. And then the music is on in the background. And yeah, you know, they may be absorbing it. But it's just different. It's not like I said, music to me right now, in my opinion, the way I see it, it's not a special event. When a record came out when I was younger, it was like, holy cow, Friday we're gonna get paid and we're gonna go to the record store and we're just gonna drive around town and listen to this album. That doesn't happen anymore. You know, now everything is accessible online, which is great, right? The accessibility is awesome. That's a positive thing.
I agree. I totally agree.
But having that physical copy where you're checking out the album cover and you're reading the liner notes and you put it in your CD player and you're laying on your bed and, like you said, you know, we're reading the lyrics and we're you know, listening to that. That was a moment. That was like, leave me alone for 2 hours. I just bought this album. You know, when's dinner going to be ready, Mom? Okay, all right, I'm going to go listen to this. And that was it. Where now it's like they download, they listen for it for another minute, they click to the next song, they click. The attention span isn't as what it was. So it's just different. And I go back to that original question where people of my generation, the classic rock fans, which is now considered classic rock, you know, what responsibility do you think we have, you know, specifically for the young kids to have an interest in rock music?
You know, I think, like I was saying earlier, like if you have children, like I'm personally not planning on having any babies, at least anytime soon. But like you bet if I popped out a kid, that kid, you know, is going to be wearing a Kiss. I have purchased a Kiss onesie just in case, you know, so who knows? Like, just because I was like, you know what, this is on sale. I want it. I just want to have it. One of my friends might have a baby, you know, God forbid, you know, maybe I have a kid one day. You know, it's like, I just always have to refer back to my dad because, you know, my mom, she was into music, but she was more hip hop R&B. So I have that influence as well. But my dad was really like my older brother growing up. He was like my best friend. So, you know, he would come home with like a bunch of CDs. There wasn't a time in our house where music wasn't being played, no matter what it was. So I couldn't imagine, you know, living in a household that doesn't celebrate music. And I think it's really important to celebrate music because, you know, it just creates a good environment. It's something to talk about. And like you were saying before, like, it's not something that's talked about anymore. You know, you log on to Spotify or Apple Music, whatever, you hear a preview of a song and you're like, oh, that's cool. But like, meanwhile, like with people my age or younger, it's not an experience for them. You know, I go and I pick up a record. I'm like, oh, who produced this? Who mixed this? Who did the engineering on this record? I don't even think if I mentioned produce, mix, and engineer to another person my age, they would have any idea what that even means in music, you know? So there's no more, opening up the cassette tape and reading the little notes they wrote or flipping over the record and, seeing the lineup and the cool pictures that come with it. It's no longer both a visual and an audible experience. It's just, this looks cool, I'll click on it,
I've told the story a few times, the band South of Eden, which is this new band out of Columbus, Ohio, which they're just fantastic. They're incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I was taken aback when my son and his friends were on social media waiting for the album to drop at midnight. And this is a band that had not released anything yet. And here they were on Snapchat going, I can't wait. What do you think they're going to have on the record? This and that, blah, blah. And it took me back to that time waiting in line at a record store before midnight when I knew a new album was going to be out and experiencing that. That's the line at the record store today. Friends on Snapchat or friends on social media talking about something. And then when the album drops, they're all listening to it at the same time, which is a really
literally
cool
got
experience.
Chills.
Yeah.
I just got chills when you said that. That just made me so happy that they were really doing that. Because it was like on Wednesday, the big Stevie Nicks, she had her concert, the 24 Karat experience, whatever, that we went to the drive-in, and like that was me. Like I was texting my girlfriends, like, okay, today is the big Stevie Nicks concert day. Like we were so excited. So it's awesome to hear that your son and his friends are kind of experiencing the same thing now.
Well, yeah, I mean, it changes, but it's evolving, right? And that leads me to my next question regarding this topic is technology.
Mm-hmm.
What does the industry need to do? What does rock music need to do to be innovative in terms of technology to grab that youth? Because let's face it, kids that are teenagers today are more tech savvy than I was, than you were. I mean, they're basically growing up with it.
Oh, of course, yeah.
As soon as they pop out of the womb, I mean, it's like they're on social media. It's like so they have that connection. That's a big part of their life. Now, pop music and hip hop and R&B are all, releasing singles that are capturing the attention of the youth, where rock and roll is kind of behind. And I don't think rock music really adapted to the new way of listening to music. I think they still have that mentality that let's release the physical copy, which I still think they should do. I think everybody should still release a physical copy of their
absolutely.
of their album.
Yeah.
But I just think that when you talk technology or innovation with the music industry, they don't want to talk about innovation. They don't want to talk about technology. The last time something innovative came along, they lost all this money with Napster, right? They don't want anything that's going to rock the boat, right? I mean, they've learned how to make money with streaming. They have reoccurring revenue every month, which basically screws the artists. I mean, people don't even understand how much the artist is getting screwed. So they don't want anything new or innovative. They're comfortable the way it is. They want it to stay the same. But what can, rock music do to bring back that youth audience? I think, sorry to be long-winded here, but I think that with the pandemic and the angst and the anger that's being created in the younger people is a recipe for success with rock music, because rock music always thrives on that angst and that anger, that middle finger. And when you have kids doing the same thing every day, being annoyed and pissed off, this is the time. This is really where it could and should happen.
Yeah, for younger people, social media is really the ticket. Nobody is going to the store and going to pick up, we don't have a Metal Edge anymore. Rip Magazine barely exists. That kind of stuff doesn't really happen. And as far as the more mainstream rock magazines, I think Kerrang, Metal Hammer, those kind of things, they showcase new music, but the physical, like nobody's reading a magazine. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
I don't know anybody who just has magazines that they flip through. So I think social media is really the big ticket for the younger generation. And the newer bands, like, you were saying earlier, Tyler, Ryan and the Shakedown, the Struts, I think they're doing amazing. It's not going to happen overnight. This kind of stuff could take years and, however long the process may be. I think bands like that who are, mainstream, you know, their music can totally be played on the radio. So I think that's really important that those bands are now kind of coming to the forefront, and they're having fans who are, you know, your age. They have fans who are my age. They have fans who are even younger than me. They have fans who are even older than you. You know, it's kind of all across the board. So I think the resurgence of bands like that, you know, the whatever it's called, modern rock, let's say, is really important. And that they're playing out too. And like you said, they're getting the physical copies into the hands of the youth. So they are getting to experience that, oh, I really like this band, their new record's coming out, let me buy it. And I think that's really important that they're going past opening Spotify and streaming a song, because that does literally nothing for the artist. And I think it's also important to educate people, because for me, most of my friends and the people I hang out with are somewhat involved in the music industry and do have a grasp on how things affect the artist, how this affects the label, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just not common knowledge for most people. So a lot of people think, oh, well, I got their album on Apple Music, I'm doing a good thing. And yes, it's great that you're hearing it, but you're not benefiting the artist really much at all, you know? So I think the newer bands playing out, getting the physical copies, you know, using social media to kind of draw people in is really important. And also collaborating is really important. I know the Struts have done a lot of stuff in pop culture. They did the Victoria's Secret fashion show, which I'm sure half the people watching had no idea who they are. But I hope that after watching them, they maybe were like, hey, let me go check out this band. So I think incorporating themselves into pop culture is also very important, because that's what's going to get them into the eyes, into the minds, into the ears of the young people. And hopefully they'll just take that as a little kick in the right direction.
You brought up a great point with the Struts. You know, they have done some pop culture events like the Victoria's Secret TV show that was, I think, last fall or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they also have done a lot of collaboration with artists that are outside of rock and roll. I think their last album, they did something with Kesha. And, you know, this album, they did a song with Robbie Williams called Strange Days. Yeah. And they also did something with Joe Elliott and Tom Morello on the album, too, as well.
Yeah, that was like the newest one they just dropped. And I think that's, you know, that's great. And even though it might not be, you know, working with Joe Elliott, if I said Joe Elliott to a 16-year-old, they're going to be like, who?
Right,
right. That also will help them appeal to maybe the older audience that might not, you know, kind of dismiss them. Oh, they're just, that's not real, like rock music. But, oh, you know, the guy from Def Leppard will work with them. So that's not nothing, you know?
It helps legitimize them to the crowd that I'm a part of, the demographic that I'm a part of, right? And I also think it kind of does what country music does. And I've brought this up in the past, where country music, whatever, if you like it or don't like it, you cannot deny the fact that they really bring their legacy artists to help showcase the new artist. How many times have we seen, you know, a legacy country artist be on a brand new country star's new album or second album?
Right.
And it, like you said, it helps bring in both sides of the audience. It brings the younger audience to the legacy artist, and it brings the legacy artist crowd into the new artist. And it's a system that works, and it has proven to work. And I'm really happy that the Struts are one of the few bands that are embracing that, because I think that's really important. I know Tyler Bryant had Rebecca Lovell from Larkin Poe, who's also his wife, on his latest album. And he also had Charlie Starr from Blackberry Smoke, too, as well. So, you know, he's even started to do that. But I think there needs to be more of that. Not to say that every track on every new album has to have a collaboration, but at least a song or two where a familiar audience can bridge the gap to that new audience. And I think that's really important, and I hope that continues, you know, to do, or artists continue to do that. And also bring these new bands on tour with you, right? Because that was the way when we were younger. Like, you know, bands would bring in like an unknown or a band that was just starting out, and you'd expose the audience to that band, and that doesn't happen as much as it should like it did back in the day.
Right. And, I think it's about, like you were saying about the albums, how not every song should be a collaboration. But I do appreciate bands that are very clear with their influences, if that makes sense. I'm not saying that bands should, make songs specifically to the style of their influences. But like, for example, the Struts, obviously you hear some Queen in there. And bands that are really open about who influenced them to be musicians, who influenced this record, who influenced writing this song, that'll also kind of incite people to maybe go listen to those bands too, especially with like the younger people who may not be as familiar with the influences. So, you hear this record, you'd be like, oh, I hear some Queen in there, maybe some Led Zeppelin influences, and they can refer back and maybe find interest and kind of dive in a little bit deeper.
I agree. I think bands should embrace who influenced them and where they're coming from, right? Because I think rock fans in general always appreciate everyone's journey in rock and roll, because everyone's journey is different, right? Everyone's rock and roll story is their own. And there might be some similarities with people, but there's always a uniqueness about everyone's story. And I think when you hear a band saying, like the Struts, you hear Queen, you hear the Stones in there, you hear some Bowie, and again, when you peel back the orange and you're a kid and you're listening to the Struts and you like what you hear and they talk about Queen and the Stones and Bowie or whoever they talk to, you may want to go listen to that stuff, right? And listen, and you keep pulling back the orange. I'll bring my son up again. He plays guitar, and he listens to all these rock guitar players. And I said, you should listen to some blues guitar players. He's like, why? I go, because the more that you have influencing you, the better you're going to sound. The more depth of a player you're going to have, or you're going to be, I should say. And if you're a music fan and you like the Struts, and they like those bands I just mentioned, by you listening to them and appreciating them, your palette is going to be so much deeper with rock and roll than just, I classify music fans as, two ways: music consumers, right? And music fans. Music consumers are the ones that just kind of listen in the background, right? They know all the popular songs. Music fans get into the weeds, they get into the dirt of, like you said, who mixed, who produced, who engineered, who this song was written by, what track on this album, it's number 3, it's like they know all that stuff. That's a music fan. And, when you start to see people evolve into that, it's an exciting process.
Yeah, and I think like with newer artists, not even necessarily like newer rock artists, but just who is prevalent in music now. The big thing that's been on everybody's hot topic list is Miley Cyrus, who is taking a hard turn into the rock and metal genre. And that's being received two ways. Either this is great, I'm so excited to hear her take on the genre we love so much. And then there's the opposite side, which is the side that's working towards killing rock music, which is the older generation who is like, she's right up from the bat, just assume she's a poser. This is going to be terrible. She has no right to do Metallica songs, blah, 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 blah. And it's that closed-mindedness that I think will ultimately have a negative effect on getting rock music to younger people.
I agree. I had a discussion, the other night with a gal in the UK about this. And, when you hear the name Miley Cyrus, there's a lot of things that, someone my age thinks about. It thinks about, what TV show was she on?
She was on Hannah Montana. Thank you. I went to her concert when I was 7. She held my hand. It was a big deal.
So we think of Hannah Montana. We think about her father, Billy Ray. And, we think about, the controversies that have surrounded her and the things that she's done. And I think it can be a good thing, right? I think anytime, you can expose a new audience to rock music, I think it's nothing but positive. I want to like this. I want to check it out because some of the things that I've seen, like her live at the Whiskey Go-Go, it's good. It's really good.
Yeah.
I just hope that it's authentic, right? Because rock,
I agree.
Yeah, rock fans really want the authenticity. They don't care about, they don't want the overproduction. They don't want the Pro Tools and whatever they use to make everything sound great. They like that authentic. They like the rawness of it, and I hope she goes in that direction. But even if she doesn't, if she brings in a crowd into rock music, that's a good thing, And I bring back the Dirt with the demographic that changed virtually overnight once young kids started to see that movie, and you see the merchandise being bought prior to the Dirt. The people buying Motley Crue stuff over 35. After the Dirt, the majority was under 35. So that's a big deal. That's a huge deal.
Yeah, and I think, any way you slice it, even if what she ends up doing with her rock and metal album, because I think she just announced that she's going to drop an album of originals of rock music. So that's going to be interesting to see. But I think any way you look at it, even if it's not your cup of tea, that's a massive platform for rock and metal music. And it certainly will draw some people in who are like, hey, I really like this song. Who I don't know if she's announced the track list or anything yet, but this kid might hear Miley Cyrus do a cover of I don't know, Battery or something, and they're going to be like, oh, this is really good. I wonder what it actually sounded like. And then they'll go out and kind of explore a little bit more. It's just like when Lady Gaga did the whatever award show that was with Metallica, and everybody was pissed off about it. But you also have to realize that on the other hand, this is a whole new demographic that these kids and the people who are watching this award show, which typically metalheads are very anti-award shows, but now they get to experience this, and it might not be the conventional way or the way that we experienced it, but it's still getting to them somehow. So you have to be hopeful in that aspect.
I'm interested to see what kind of players or who she has playing on the albums. Is she going to have collaborations with people?
I think that'll be huge. If she gets some big rock players, or not even big rock players, but names that, the older generation can identify with, and maybe the younger generation can identify with too. I think it'll be massive. Honestly, I've seen a lot of mixed feelings about it, but I do think I used to be a metal elitist, okay? I remember when I was younger, I saw a picture of Lady Gaga dressed as Kiss, and I was pissed off about it. Because I was like, you are not a metalhead. But that's because I was a closed-minded, 13-year-old girl. Because I see metalheads in general, we are very protective of rock and metal music, I think. It's like our babies. And in a way, we want it to stay ours, and we want it to stay underground. But is that good for the bands? No. If we want the bands we love so much to succeed, we have to let them go a little bit. It's like your baby. Get out of the nest.
Right. That's a great analogy. Great comparison to make, because I think there is something to that. People. Whenever you think of Metallica and you think of their fans, right? Everything prior to the Black album is excellent. It's great. And then they sold out on the Black album. It's like bands have to evolve. And I even talked to George Lynch about this, about how fans don't like their artists to evolve. They like them to stay in their box and not change. But an artist has to keep changing. An artist has to keep fresh and stretch themselves and evolve as an artist. There's really only one band that hasn't evolved, and that's AC/DC, and they do it very well. And everybody's excited about their new album. Everybody loves their music. But not every artist is AC/DC. Not everybody can play the same thing every album, every time they release new music. It's just not in their mindset to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's really important to kind of accept that. And I know it's hard for metal fans because we love this so much. Like you said, this is our lives for some people. We come home every day, we put on a record, and it's part of our daily routine. And these bands, we love them so much, and we want them to be ours forever. And they can't. If we want to see the bands we love not struggle. You kind of got to let go a little bit, and it's hard, but it's what'll ultimately benefit them. It'll benefit their label, and it'll benefit the younger generation to kind of keep it alive, because if they can alter their sound just a little bit, and maybe not even necessarily all the time, but just have some songs that'll be more appealing to the younger audience, some songs that stay, on the course that they've been on. I think it's important to have that balance. That way you're not just singling out one audience. You have to appeal to multiple audiences, or else you'll just stay stagnant. You won't go anywhere.
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned something too a few moments ago about how, rock fans don't like award shows.
Yes.
And yet the topics come up every year, and I'm guilty of it too. When we see the Grammy nominations, some of the nominations aren't even rock and roll. You see the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductees. Some of the inductees are not even not even rock and roll. We see Jennifer Lopez and Shakira be on the Super Bowl halftime show. So these are like the three big markers every year that rock fans get pissed off and annoyed about. But at the same time, this is going on forever. This hasn't changed. Metallica got screwed by Jethro Tull.
Jethro Tull, yeah.
And the Grammys. You think about the Super Bowl. Not every Super Bowl has had a rock act. They've had Michael Jackson. They've had Prince. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is all about selling tickets and selling and getting revenue. So they, of course, are going to try to broaden their audience by inducting people like Notorious B.I.G. or rap artist or country artist or whatever. It is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I do disagree with them doing that, but I don't understand, why every year we get so pissed off. I know, like I said, I get riled up too, but I just think, who cares about that stuff really? I mean, does it really matter at the end of the day? Do we want rock and roll to be legitimized by mainstream audiences? No, I don't think we do.
That's what I'm saying as well, because it's like, at the end of the day, do we really care that much? It's been happening for so long. Do we need these bands to be, recognized and get this label on a plaque? No, because to us, they're champion. They're number one to us. And we are the ones who are going to go out and buy the records and buy tickets to their shows and buy the VIP packages and buy their merch. The people who, are watching the Grammys, I can guarantee you, even if Metallica did win a Grammy or, whoever, these people who are watching the Grammys are not going to run out and buy a bunch of Metallica merch because they won a Grammy. They won't. It's just the way it is. So as true rock and metal fans, I understand that it's frustrating because we do love these people so much and we want them to have this grand recognition. But at the end of the day, I think it just comes down to, as long as we recognize them and we continue to champion them, those labels don't matter.
And to continue rock and roll and to continue with the younger generation, do young teenage kids watch the Grammys? Do they watch the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Do they watch the Super Bowl halftime show? No, they don't.
I don't even think, like, if you are watching the Grammys or any of those award shows, that they even air it on television most of the time. I don't think that even gets airplay. So even if, whoever did win, it's not like people are really going to know about it unless you're following it online or, tracking it, because they don't even get the screen time. So it's like, do we even want our artists to be disrespected like that? No, screw it. Whatever. They're number one to us. We are the ones who are supporting them, not whoever runs the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or the Grammys.
I remember when Aerosmith appeared on the Super Bowl halftime show with Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake. And there was major pushback on Aerosmith because of that. But it's one of the reasons why Aerosmith was one of the biggest selling acts in the 90s, right? I mean, it was one of the reasons why, they remained relevant, is because they knew how to cross over into a younger audience, and they used Britney Spears and Justin Timberlake as that tool to do so. So there's nothing wrong with that.
It's like a double-edged sword. You're going to have the people who can really take a step back and appreciate, like, okay, they're really open to their demographic. It might not be for my taste, but it's going to bring other people in to appreciate this music. And then you have the other side who are like sellouts, and get really angry about it. So I just think, general consensus is with metalheads is that open-mindedness is key if we want these bands to survive.
When I look at the younger generation front and center here, as I've mentioned, with my son liking that music, I've often brought up the subject of the lack of rock stars in rock and roll.
They don't even exist.
They really don't. And when we talk about Van Halen, like we did, we think about David Lee Roth. He was the face of Van Halen in the early part of the 80s. I mean, Van Halen was the guitar god, and you heard him. But when you saw someone jumping in the air and flying through the air and having this personality that David Lee Roth did, he really was the controversial figure in Van Halen. When you think about Motley Crue and how the fact that they're still alive, but how, they were just, trouble from the word go, and Guns N' Roses. And, you think back of Queen with Freddie Mercury and Robert Plant and all these rock stars that existed. And then you had the grunge movement come in, which was anti-rock star. And I still appreciate that music. There's a lot of stuff that I do like from that era. But now you don't have that personality that resonates and connects with the young people. And I think that's a huge, huge loss.
It's weird because in like pop culture, not metal or rock or anything, but in the music that's like popular, played on the radio now, I think it's peculiar to me that it's almost cool to them to not care, to like not have that persona. Like I listen to some of the music and it's very monotonous. There's not a lot like going on with like their vocals. Like it's very like laid back, lo-fi, vibey. And it's like people don't want to rock out anymore. It's so strange to me that that's like the norm, is to just be like laid back and not really give a shit. And it's strange. And then you have the opposite side, which is the really outlandish popular music. Like I did whatever that freaking Cardi B, Nicki Minaj song is. I don't know. Yeah. I don't even listen to it, but like they're really lo-fi, really, I don't care. I'm just going to sing my song, or really in your face, vulgar, obscene. And like, there's no middle ground. Like it's there. And like you said, there is no rock star. Like I couldn't imagine just going to a show and seeing one person on the stage, just kind of doing their thing, no back band, they've got dancers, but it's like that's not doing anything for me musically. So it's just so strange what's popular now. And again, I talk about the Struts all the time because I do love them so much. But I remember the first time I saw them in concert and I was like blown away. I was like, holy shit, this dude's in this extravagant outfit running from each side of the stage, jumps in the crowd, brings someone up on stage, everybody dances. It's like an event. It's this whole huge production. That showmanship is missing. And I think it would be appreciated if more artists went that route. I think it's important because, who wants to go to a show and just see somebody, in one spot, with their backup dancers? That's not fun. I mean, maybe to some people it's fun, but there's just such a lack of care and, the desire to be different and be innovative, So I think, these newer bands who are, because, they still have to try and make it. The Struts, I think, have made it, but there's still so many more places they can go. And it doesn't seem like they're comfortable where they are yet. And they're going to keep, doing whatever they can to build up their audience and fill up those shows. So they really care. And you can tell when you go to a show how much that artist cares.
Yeah, I agree. I had the pleasure of seeing the Struts a couple years ago up in Wisconsin, and they just absolutely blew the doors off the place. And it was just a fun, great event to see. And, I walked out, I'm like, that's a rock star right there. Luke Spiller is a rock star. And I think there's some, young talent out there in some of these great new rock bands that are developing their personality. I think that's on the way. But, you know, we see the hip hop artists and we see the rap artists be controversial and embrace that, right? They embrace that type of lifestyle. I mean, we just saw, you know, how many, you know, rock stars or people that are in rock bands don't want to rock the boat with alienating, you know, the left side of our politics and the right side of our politics, right?
Yeah.
But then we see 50 Cent come out the other day and say, I'm voting for Trump. I ain't paying taxes that Joe Biden wants. I'm not going to be 20 cent. I'm 50 cent. You know, so,
oh my God.
but my point is that no matter what side of the aisle you fall on, he's not afraid to say something about that. He's not afraid to, you know, embrace that. So why is rock music not being rock and roll? You know what I mean? Like we were always the middle finger. We were always the angst. And of course, punk rock, you know, it has their own deal too. But rock and roll was always that anti-establishment and always, you know, that attitude. And now, you know, we're in I don't want to rock the boat phase. What is that? I don't understand that.
I think it goes both ways because I certainly have seen a few very well-known musicians speaking out about, you know, their views in politics. And I think it really just has to do with this specific election, like specifically what is going on now. Because, you know, I mean, I was like 8 when Obama was elected. So, like, I don't really have a grasp on what elections were like before the 2016 election, because that's when I was in high school, we were studying it and all that stuff. But I don't think it was such a huge deal to the point where people would have to be like speaking out and stating their opinion, stating their stance on it, because it wasn't this crazy, you know, world splitting thing. And I think people are being so cautious is because, again, it's just this election. Like, everybody is so sensitive. I don't know if sensitive is the word I want to be using, but it's very touchy for a lot of people. And I just don't think, you know, for me, I don't speak about politics really ever, even in my personal life on social media. I stay away from it because I know some wacko is going to come out of the woodwork who I don't even know and start some drama. So I just like to avoid it. I avoid the conversation, you know, let's talk about music. We can all agree about that. You know, we're all in harmony when we're talking about bands. So I try to keep things mainly focused on that, just because it's like, why cause a conflict? I think that's what most people must be thinking as well. You know, why am I going to say this and cause all this uproar over a tweet? You know, it just seems like more trouble than it's worth.
I also think, too, that people are afraid to get boycotted. I mean, how many times have we seen on Twitter or Facebook or just in general, you know, seeing people boycott somebody because of what they said and what their beliefs are, whether it's Ted Nugent, whether it's John Bon Jovi, you know?
And that's very popular, at least in my generation. It's cancel culture. You know, you say one thing, you do another, canceled, you know? And through the power of social media, it happens instantaneously, you know, right before your eyes. You could say something, and before you know it, you lost 100,000 followers, and you're in headlines. So I again, that's the bad side of social media, I think, is enabling these people to just cause this insane uproar over every little thing, when, you know, at the end of the day, what I always say, it's never that serious. You know, we're all here, at least, you know, in my experience on Twitter, we're all here because we love music. Why are we going to bring something that's not even related to it into the mix just to shake things up? It doesn't seem worth it to me. So I guess it just depends on what your prerogative is, but, you know.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I think a lot of it is, it's up to the person hearing the you know, the comment, right? I mean, you know, like, I don't understand why somebody wants to boycott and take away the joy they've had from a music song or a movie or an athlete, if they've got their jersey or their baseball team hat or whatever, they can say whatever they want to say. It's up to you whether to agree with it or not, and then move on with your life. I mean, I don't know how many, I've said this before, I love Ted Nugent's music. I agree with nothing that he says, but it doesn't stop me from listening to his music. Absolutely not.
I think people have lost the ability to differentiate, if that makes sense. Like, you can love somebody's art and hate the person. Just because the person, said a shitty thing doesn't mean that now all of a sudden their entire body of work is garbage and you're going to go burn all their T-shirts, You have it's the same way, like, just because they're a public figure doesn't mean that they need to be villainized necessarily. Like, I have friends who all have different political opinions and social opinions and everything like that. And it's just, an agree to disagree. If we know it'll cause, a little rift, we just don't talk about it and we keep it to ourselves. And I think that's really lacking in today's culture, is everybody's got to get their 2 cents in. And if somebody doesn't agree with it, it's the end of the world. And it shouldn't be like that. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion. And honestly, they're allowed to share it and post it wherever they want to, so long as it's not, harmful or anything like that. But there's no agree to disagree anymore. It's either I'm right, you're wrong, or shut up.
Yeah. And I think it's okay to piss people off. Rock and roll has pissed off generations, with their music.
That's the point.
Right. So don't be, if you're a young artist out there, don't be afraid of that. If you piss somebody off and you make headlines, there's no headline that's a bad headline, right? So in terms of getting your name out there, if you're controversial, and obviously it's got to be organic and it's got to be authentic. You can't just be saying stuff just to say stuff for clickbait, because people will catch on after a while. But if you have that in your system, as part of who you are, don't be afraid to show that. Don't muzzle yourself.
Yeah, and I guess it can be scary too, as like from the perspective of a new artist who's really trying to make a name. They probably don't want to rock the boat too much because, they're really trying to gain that following. And you don't want to see that number go down. It's a bad day when you lose followers. So it's just such a fine line. And I think now specifically, everybody's just so on edge. Anything can be taken the wrong way. So it's just a matter of, like I said, what I believe, I keep to myself when it comes to things that I know will just cause a problem, because I'm not a fan of conflict. I don't even want the discussion. Right. I know my stance. Of course I do research. I'm interested in seeing what other people have to say, because of course you should always be learning and taking in other perspectives, because that is important. But at the same time, I can understand why certain artists kind of want to stay away from it, just because, why give yourself a headache that isn't necessary?
I totally agree. Well, we're going to end on that. Jade, thank you very much for coming on the show. I thought it was a great conversation, as always, and I look forward to your next visit.
Thank you so much for having me, and for always sticking with me through all my shit.
Of course. We all have shit that we're dealing with, and you shouldn't deny someone or you shouldn't lack understanding just because someone has shit just like you that they're dealing with.
Right. So thank you so much, Jay. It was awesome. I'm glad we could catch up.
Yeah, that was great. I really do appreciate it. Thank you very much. Once again, everybody, that's Jaide Alicia. I'm Jay Scott from The Hook Rocks, the Ultimate Rock Community Podcast. Stay strong, stay healthy, and we will talk again soon. Thank you.